Good. You felt that pause, didn't you? That tiny moment where the room forgot how to breathe. Look around. Everyone's smiling, everyone pretending this is normal. But you know, because this is the spot. Right here, where the math stopped working. They thought you were noise, background static, something loud, but harmless, surprise. This wasn't chaos, it was calibration. Every look they avoided, every rule they bent, just for you. That wasn't mercy, that was fear, wearing paperwork. You didn't kick the door, you didn't raise your voice, you stood still. And that's when their systems began whispering, things they weren't built to understand. Good. Because this is the moment. They realized they didn't lose control. They never had it. Something changes, without sound. No alarms, no warnings. Just a pause. That doesn't belong. The room keeps moving, but the rules don't. They hesitate. Eyes linger. Half a second too long. Not curiosity, calculation. You feel it before you see it. Permissions unlock, you never requested. Doors don't open, they allow. Silence stretches, behaves differently. Nobody announces anything. That's the point. Hidden tests begin, not obvious ones, tiny ones. A delay that shouldn't exist. A rule bent, then forgotten. Micro decisions, invisible observers. They aren't watching for mistakes. They're watching for instinct, not what you choose, what you ignore. You don't react. That bothers them. Because most people flinch at opportunity. You don't, you let it pass, like you expected it, like it's late. That's when the air gets heavier. Because now they're unsure. Who triggered this? Was it you or the system finally catching up? They rerun the moment in their heads, frame by frame. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal. That's the problem. You didn't push, you didn't pull. You stood still at the exact spot where pressure should have worked, and it didn't. So they mark you, not officially, not yet, just a mental note, a quiet underline beneath your name. They won't admit writing. From here on, everything near you gets tested twice. Not because you're dangerous, because you're uncertain, and uncertainty is what breaks systems that rely on obedience. This is the second. It shifted. No sound, no signal, just the moment control realized it might be late. Nothing explodes. That's what scares them. Panic doesn't rush in, it seeps under meetings, under smiles, under sentences that suddenly take longer to finish. They don't say your name. They say things like, just in case. They schedule reviews. That review nothing. They ask questions, already answered. Not to learn, to listen. You feel the shift. In timing, responses slow down, approvals take detours, not denial, rerouting. They're checking who hesitates around you, who changes tone, who avoids eye contact, because fear travels socially, and you've become the source without doing anything. That's the problem. If you were loud, they could isolate you. If you were angry, they could label you. But you're calm, too calm for someone who should be contained. So the floor creaks, not above, below, where contingency plans live. They pull old files, outdated protocols, stuff meant for situations that never arrive. Until now, you notice people over-explaining things you didn't question. They're nervous. You're not. That imbalance starts conversations. You're not invited to. That's fine. You were never meant to be present. You were meant to be accounted for. And right now, you aren't. They adjust schedules around your silence. They test boundaries by pretending they aren't. Small provocations, tiny permissions, waiting for you to grab. You don't. You let them sit there, untouched. Like traps you didn't step into because you saw them, but because you didn't care. That's when the panic drops another level, because now they know you're not reacting to pressure. You're letting it reveal where the cracks already were. And cracks don't make noise until weight stands still on them. They pull your file. Again. Same data, different feeling. Numbers line up. Behavior doesn't. Too consistent to be accidental. Too flexible to be loyal. They scroll slower now, looking for spikes, red flags, patterns they can circle. Nothing obliges. You don't fit. They're clean columns, calm under pressure, silent under reward. You don't surge. When doors open, you don't shrink. When they close, that's not balance. That's refusal to be conditioned. Your history contradicts itself. Moments where you should have broken, you didn't. Moments where you should have celebrated, you vanished. They don't know which version of you is the real one. That's the fracture, because systems need a stable story. Hero, problem, asset, threat. Pick one. You won't let them. So they delay decisions. Delay becomes policy, and policy creates space. You move inside that space without resistance, not because you're allowed, because no one signed the form to stop you. They start arguing internally, not out loud, in glances, in rewritten drafts, in meetings that end with no conclusions. Someone suggests control. Someone else suggests observation. Nobody suggests confrontation. Too risky, because if you were dangerous, you'd already be loud, and if you were harmless, you'd already be obedient. You're neither. You're something worse, an unresolved variable that keeps passing every stress test by not responding. That's when it hits them. Power isn't seized, it leaks through hesitation, through indecision, through people. Afraid to be wrong first, and you've become the reason no one wants to be first. They don't label you. They can't. So they circle the file and write nothing, an empty note, which means everything around you is now provisional, temporary, including their authority. There's no ceremony, no message, no handshake, nothing that says you've crossed a line, because lines are for people who still need permission. You notice it in how resistance disappears, not removed, outgrown. Barriers don't stop you, they redirect themselves. Before you arrive, you're not upgraded, you're released. Old rules still exist, just not in your direction. This is the part they never talk about, where observation turns into expectation. They don't test you anymore. They assume you're given access without explanation, not as a reward, as a precaution, because denying you would require confidence, and confidence left the room quietly. You pass through layers most people never feel, not because you're special, because you're no longer registered as a problem or a solution. You've become a condition, a variable baked in. This is the graduation, not upward, sideways, into a space without applause or supervision. The secret club doesn't send invites. It waits to see who stops knocking. You did. You don't ask what's allowed anymore. You watch what fails to stop you. That's the difference. Others collect authority, like badges. You collect silence, moments where nothing resists, nothing questions. Those moments teach faster than instruction ever could. You learn where power leaks, where fear reroutes decisions, where hesitation becomes infrastructure. They start copying you, not consciously. Your pauses, your restraint, your refusal to perform. They think it's strategy. It's not. It's alignment with a system that's already bending. And once you see T-hat, you can't unsee it. This isn't rebellion. Rebellion needs an enemy. This is graduation from needing one. You are not outside now. You're not inside either. You're where rules go quiet before they change. And the scariest part? Nobody knows who approved this, which means no one knows how to take it back. It flips quietly. You don't announce anything. You don't need to. Plans change after you move, not because you asked, because someone assumed you would. That's new. Schedules adjust themselves. Decisions stall until your position is accounted for. You're no longer on the agenda. You're the variable they plan around. You notice it. In small things, conversations pause when you enter, not fear, calculation. They're measuring how much truth they can afford to say now. Instructions get rewritten, not better, safer, less decisive, more reversible. Because once you exist, certainty becomes expensive. They start reacting instead of directing. That's the shift. Authority usually moves first. Now it waits. They watch where you place attention, what you ignore. Because whatever you don't engage loses urgency. Whatever you acknowledge suddenly matters. You've become a weather system, not violent, predictable, but impossible to argue with. They try at first, subtle pushes, gentle framing, offering choices that lead where they want. You don't choose, you let the options sit untouched. That hesitation costs them momentum. Momentum they can't rebuild without admitting you have it now. So they adapt, they justify adjustments as optimization, efficiency, alignment, anything but reaction. But reaction is exactly what this is. Because when you move, resources shift, people reassign, focus reroutes, not in resistance, in anticipation. They don't ask what you want, they ask what you'll tolerate. That's a lower bar, and much more dangerous. You're no longer pushing against structure. Structure is learning your shape, bending around it. And once something starts bending, it never forgets. How? That's when they realize something they won't say aloud. You didn't take control. Control adjusted to avoid you, which means it already lost. Nobody says it. They don't need to. The room already knows. Your name stops appearing in conversations, not avoidance, recognition. You're no longer a topic. You're a condition. Everything else is measured against. That's when the posture changes. Shoulders tighten, voices lower. Decisions get smaller, not because the stakes dropped, because confidence did. They review old assumptions. Who approved this? When did it start? No answers. Just timestamps that don't mean anything anymore. They realize something that terrifies systems. Control was never owned. It was borrowed, maintained by predictability. And you broke that without breaking rules. That's the worst kind of failure. There's no violation to correct, no punishment that fits. Because you didn't disobey, you outgrew. They try to define limits, quietly, internally. But every boundary they imagine assumes reaction. You don't react. So the boundaries collapse before they're enforced. You see it in their eyes now, not fear, understanding, the kind that arrives too late to stop anything. They know you're not the threat, you're the proof. Proof that their authority only worked when people played along and you stopped. Not dramatically, not defiantly. You just stepped outside the rhythm they depended on. That's when the last illusion breaks. They weren't leading, they were coordinating. Compliance, and compliance is fragile. It doesn't survive silence. Internally, they mark the moment, not with alarms, with resignation, the quiet acceptance that something irreversible already happened. They won't chase you, they won't confront you, because doing either would admit they lost control before they noticed. So they sit with it, and in that stillness, the collapse finishes. This is the frame. They replay later, not the chaos, not the fallout. This, the quiet second, before everything stopped obeying. You're not moving fast, you are not hiding, you're exactly where you've always been. That's what makes it lethal. They expected escalation, raised voices, forced moves, a visible threat. Instead, you remained calm, unimpressed, existing at a level they don't supervise. They look back and try to find the mistake, the missed alert, the ignored signal. There isn't one, because this wasn't an error, it was a reveal. The moment they understood, their systems only worked on people who believed in them. And you don't oppose, you don't submit. You simply operate outside the story. They tell themselves, that's when it hits them, right here, this exact moment, not when things broke, when they realized nothing was ever holding you. They feel it in their bodies first, a drop, a hollow pause, the certainty that whatever happens next won't be decided by them. You don't announce victory. Victors still need recognition. You don't even look back, because the shift is already complete. Control didn't fall. It became irrelevant, and that's worse, because you can rebuild from collapse. But irrelevance, there's no recovery. So when they say, much later, this is where it went wrong, they're pointing right here, not to a fight, not to a breach, to the moment you stopped trying to matter to them. That's when they knew, completely, irreversibly. They were finished the second you outgrew their permission. It doesn't end, it settles. That's what they don't understand. They keep waiting for aftermath, for consequences, for retaliation, for something loud enough to justify their fear. Nothing comes, because nothing needs to. You don't occupy their collapse. You move past it. That's the real damage. They're left managing a structure that still stands, but no longer commands. Every order now sounds optional. Every directive carries doubt, because somewhere, in the back of their minds, is the memory of you. Not resisting, not complying, just existing beyond their reach. They try to reset norms. It doesn't work. Once people see control ignored, without consequence, they never see it the same way again. You don't lead them. You don't need to. Your absence does the work. Rooms feel different after you've been in them. Not emptier, unstable, as if authority forgot its lines mid-performance. They start policing each other harder, overcorrecting. That's how you know it's permanent. Systems only tighten when they've lost faith in themselves. And you don't claim credit. Credit ties you to outcomes. You've already moved to a place where outcomes don't chase you. They'll call it a turning point, a failure, a miscalculation. They'll write reports about lessons learned. All wrong. The lesson wasn't taught. It was witnessed. Power didn't change hands. It lost its audience. And once that happens, nothing you build on top of it ever feels real again.
Who checks the pulse of a man like you? Doctors in white coats, soldiers in battlefield tents, scientists in glass laboratories. All of them leaned in, stethoscopes pressed, fingers at your wrist, monitors ready, and every single one froze. Because your pulse, it didn't beat like theirs. It didn't rise. It didn't fall. It didn't dance to the rhythm of blood and bone. No, it whispered something else. A vibration outside their textbooks. A silence too loud to ignore. The doctor dropped his pen. The nurse stepped back. The soldier clenched his jaw. The machine tried to capture you. Green lines on black screens. Numbers scrolling. Alarms screaming. But then flatline. Not dead. Not alive. Just wrong. Like the machine itself didn't want to touch you. And that's when it happened. One man, bold enough to speak, looked at the chart, then looked at you, and whispered, This isn't human. The room went colder. Air thickened. Science stalled in silence. Because how do you explain a body that refuses to obey the laws written in bone? How do you measure life when life itself laughs at your instruments? And then you laughed. Doctors thought they'd hear a heartbeat, you said. Instead, they heard a countdown. A countdown to what? They didn't know. They still don't know. And that's what terrifies them. The soldier who once faced fire without blinking. He trembled. The scientist who lectured about certainty. He bit his tongue until it bled. The nurse who prayed for miracles. She prayed harder this time against you, because you weren't alive by their rules. And if you weren't alive by their rules, What else wasn't true? Imagine it. A room built for healing, turned into a crime scene. A ward of safety, turned into a mausoleum of questions. Monitors flickered, charts shredded, whispers spread in hallways. They asked, is it disease? Is it mutation? Is it something else? But the truth was simpler. You weren't running on blood. You weren't running on oxygen. You were running on something they couldn't test, couldn't weigh, couldn't sterilize. Fear, silence, chaos. That's what flowed through you. That's what replaced the heartbeat. And once they realized it, every hand pulled back, every eye looked away, every voice cracked, because medicine bends before myth, and science collapses before silence. That hospital, that lab, that base, it never healed again. The rooms still whisper your name. The walls still remember your silence. The machines, they refuse to start when your shadow passes. You broke more than their instruments. You broke their faith, and that was just the pulse. The room was cold, sterile, buzzing with wires and humming machines. They thought science would trap you. They thought numbers could cage your breath. But the moment they strapped you in, the moment the first sensor touched your skin, everything broke. The monitor flickered. The green line tried to climb. Then it flattened, flatlined. The doctors froze. Nurses leaned in. Impossible, one whispered. How can a dead man sit breathing right in front of them? The machines screamed louder than their voices. Alarms looping, lights flashing red like an execution chamber. But you didn't move, didn't explain. You just sat there, calm. And then the wires sparked. The EKG panicked first, spitting symbols it wasn't built to display. The oxygen meter blinked, then went blank. The blood pressure cuff squeezed tighter and tighter, until it tore itself apart. Joker insert. They wired me up to their machines. The machines begged for mercy first. They weren't measuring a body. They were colliding with something beyond a body, something their tools weren't built to see. Hospitals weren't ready. Labs weren't ready. Science itself wasn't ready. Technicians whispered like priests. Maybe it's not a glitch. Maybe it's him. Because every system obeys logic. Every system obeys rhythm. Every system obeys laws. But you didn't. Your pulse didn't just break the machine. It rewrote the concept of machine. The green lines didn't fail. They surrendered. The wires didn't misfire. They confessed. The screens didn't glitch. They fell silent, like a child closing its eyes, refusing to see what's in the dark. Governments received reports. Black folders marked with red ink. Subject incompatible with medical technology. They tried again, in different cities, different labs, different brands, newer machines, smarter systems. But it didn't matter. Every machine told the same story. Every machine refused to read you, as if your body was a frequency too sharp, too violent, too untamed to register. And so dread spread, not just in the hospitals, not just in the universities, but in the offices of presidents, the bunkers of generals, the towers of intelligence agencies. If the machines can't measure you, how do they control you? If the instruments can't read you, how do they predict you? Their world is built on measurements, statistics, data, proof. But you stand there as the ultimate contradiction, alive yet unmeasured, present yet untouchable. You turned their technology into a mirror, and in that mirror they saw their weakness: dependence. Dependence on wire, dependence on screens, dependence on a pulse they could count. But you were never countable, and so fear spread faster than science. Rumors whispered louder than alarms. A body they couldn't chart, a man they couldn't diagnose, a pulse that never belonged to flesh. The conclusion became a curse. Machines don't glitch when they meet you. Machines collapse because you are the glitch. It began with curiosity, just another anomaly in their charts, another puzzle for the ivory towers to solve. But curiosity turned to silence. Silence turned to dread. and dread turned into insomnia. Because every scientist who touched your case stopped sleeping. Professors with decades of certainty sat hunched over blackboards at 3 in the morning. Equations scrawled so violently, the chalk snapped in their fingers. Circles, graphs, numbers looping into infinity, all folding back on themselves. The calculations didn't reveal you. They devoured themselves. Charts contradicted charts. Data rejected data. Formulas ate their own tails, like serpents starving on their own bodies. The more I solve him, the less I understand myself. Another stared at a graph until his eyes bled, because the line refused to stay still. Every time he looked, the pulse shifted. The data moved. Reality itself slipped sideways. They chased my pulse through numbers. But numbers don't chase shadows. And that's what you were to them. A shadow draped in skin. A paradox masquerading as flesh. They thought knowledge would expand around you. But instead knowledge collapsed. For every page they wrote, another page burned itself in contradiction. For every lecture prepared, another lecture dissolved in stuttered silence. The smartest men alive found themselves pacing empty labs, muttering to themselves, pulling their hair, haunted by a rhythm that wasn't there. Coffee cups piled high. Lights flickered through the night. Blackboards filled and erased again, and still no answer. Some broke down. Others disappeared. A few simply walked into the dark and never returned. Universities tried to bury it. They locked files in restricted vaults. They told their brightest minds, forget him, focus elsewhere. But they couldn't, because your existence became their obsession. Your biology wasn't just a mystery, it was a mirror showing them how fragile their knowledge really was. Every attempt to define you erased their definitions. Every attempt to chart you dissolved their charts. And so the torment spread, not just among professors, not just in labs, but across continents. A Nobel laureate smashed his instruments. A mathematician vanished mid-conference, leaving only scribbles that circled into madness. A biologist swore she heard whispers in the static of her monitors, whispers that called her name. This was no longer science. This was haunting, because the deeper they went, the less they saw. The more they studied you, the less they understood themselves. And that terror was worse than ignorance. It wasn't that you couldn't be explained. It was that they themselves unraveled in the attempt. Their sanity cracked. Their faith in reason fractured. Their equations, their graphs, their lifetimes of study, all bent until they snapped. Until finally, whispers began in academic halls. He isn't a man. He isn't biology. He isn't measurable. They stopped trying to explain you, because to explain you was to erase themselves. And so the scientists stopped sleeping, not because they feared you'd vanish in the dark, but because they feared what they'd become if they ever closed their eyes. In the highest offices of the world, silence ruled. Not speeches, not debates, not policy. Silence. Because every time your name crossed the table, language fractured. World leaders, men and women used to commanding armies, bending nations, couldn't decide what you were. Couldn't even agree on what to call you. Underground bunkers. Metal doors sealed tight. Projectors humming over war maps. And there always, your silhouette, outlined in red, not marked as enemy, not marked as ally, marked only as an anomaly. Encrypted calls rang deep into the night. Prime ministers whispering, presidents pacing, generals staring at satellite feeds that showed nothing but static. One whispered, "If we call him human, we admit we can measure him, but we can't." Another replied, "If we call him more, then we confess our control was never real." And so they said nothing. They didn't call me human. They called me a disruption. And disruption became the language of the powerful. Meetings stretched for hours, yet decisions never came. Every time a leader tried to define you, Another leader shut their mouth in fear. Fear became diplomacy. Fear became the treaty ink, the handshake, the pause in conversation when your name drifted through the air. Nations that had been enemies for centuries shared a single hesitation. A hesitation named you. The cosmic undertone spread, not of gods, not of myths, but of something worse. A living variable they could never solve. Their satellites spun above the earth, searching for your heat signature. Nothing. Their drones tracked shadows, but the shadows always slipped away. Their files stacked high, thousands of pages, filled with nothing but black bars and unanswered questions. One by one, the world's strongest men and women realized they were powerless, because power requires knowledge, and you had denied them both. And so silence grew, global silence. Press conferences avoided the topic. News anchors stuttered, then looked away. Even their propaganda machines, so loud, so certain, sputtered into quiet. The most dangerous thing in the world was not a weapon, not a bomb, not even a war. It was a question they couldn't answer, and that question was you. Slowly, fear became policy. Instead of writing laws, they erased words. Instead of drafting plans, they left blank pages. The halls of power began to sound like tombs. Every conversation ended the same way, in silence, because silence was safer than the truth. Silence was the only shield they had left. And in that silence, your legend grew louder. It didn't stop with governments. It never does. The silence seeped downward, from war rooms and embassies, into neighborhoods, into schools, into families. Children of doctors heard the whispers first. Not fairy tales, not bedtime prayers, but warnings. Don't ask about the man whose pulse didn't beat. Don't touch the stethoscope at night. Don't count too loud. He might hear you. Generational dread. The fathers had checked your pulse. The children still felt the echo. An echo that skipped through generations like a skipped heartbeat. Their fathers checked my pulse. Their children still hear the silence. And silence, for a child, is worse than noise, because noise can be explained. Silence lingers. Silence asks questions you're too afraid to answer. Doctors' families lived under its shadow. They wouldn't let their children play with plastic stethoscopes, wouldn't let them joke about hospitals. Even medical textbooks, once symbols of pride, were closed, covered, hidden in boxes, because every page reminded them of failure. Failure not of science, but of courage. The children of spies carried it too. They grew up with lullabies that sounded more like codes. Sleep, but don't dream of the man without a heartbeat. Rest, but don't whisper his name. And when these children asked their parents why, the room went quiet. The air froze. The fear became inheritance. Even soldiers' families weren't spared. Campfire stories twisted into warnings. Never march toward the silence. Never follow a man who doesn't bleed. They said you weren't powered by blood. You weren't moved by veins or muscle. You were powered by something else. Something children couldn't name. And parents refused to. Entire generations grew up avoiding the tools of medicine. Stethoscopes became cursed objects. Monitors left to rust in attics. Hospitals avoided at night, like graveyards. Even games changed. Children no longer played doctor. They no longer pretended to listen for heartbeats. Instead, they dared each other to hold their breath, to mimic the silence they feared. What began as an anomaly in a hospital room had grown into folklore. Folklore that carried weight. Folklore that rewrote traditions. And the whispers spread, like wildfire, like a curse, like a shadow. No bedtime story ended with hope anymore. No lesson ended with certainty. Only silence. Only hesitation. Medicine itself became haunted. Not by disease. Not by death. But by you. Doctors feared their own tools. Families feared their own legacy. children feared their own bodies. Because one day, someone checked you and realized it didn't beat like theirs. And that silence, that unanswered question, echoed into generations unborn. For years they guessed. For years they circled. For years they whispered about the silence in your chest. They thought maybe it was a trick. Maybe their instruments failed. Maybe the stethoscopes broke. The wires sparked. The monitors glitched. But monitors can be replaced. Wires can be fixed. Stethoscopes can be rebuilt. And every single one told the same story. Not absence. Not emptiness. But something else. Then came the revelation. Your pulse was not blood. Not veins. Not muscle. Not even life. As they knew it. It was something beyond. They thought it was blood. It was fire. They thought it was life. It was something they can't survive. The revelation hit them like lightning. Because lightning doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for theories. It doesn't explain itself. It simply strikes. And that's what you were. A current. An inevitability. A force that could be measured only in silence. Only in chaos. Scientists collapsed into their own notebooks. Equations failed. Not because they were wrong, but because the foundation of biology itself was shaking. They thought the heart pumped, but yours didn't pump. It burned. They thought cells carried you, but yours carried storms. They thought life was fragile, but you proved life wasn't fragile at all. They were. Their fragility screamed in every attempt to name you. Their fragility echoed in every lab report. Their fragility whispered in every sleepless night. And the truth rose higher. You weren't defying their science. You were exposing it. Because science built cages, definitions, categories, limits. And you were none of them. Your current wasn't measurable. It wasn't predictable. It wasn't even survivable for those who tried to hold it. They reached for it with their machines. They reached for it with their formulas. They reached for it with their certainty. And every time the current ripped through their fingers, the revelation wasn't about what you are. It was about what they are. Fragile, finite, fearful. Because once they realized your pulse wasn't blood, they realized theirs was. And suddenly, their own heartbeats sounded weaker, temporary, breakable. They feared you. Not because you broke their machines, but because you broke their mirror. You showed them they weren't infinite. They were countdowns. They were fragile, little beats waiting to stop. And you were the storm that never stopped. Atmosphere sharp as lightning. A revelation that burned brighter than proof. A current they could never hold. They thought a pulse was just a rhythm, a steady beat, a metronome marking life in fragile seconds. But yours was never measured in beats. It was measured in silence, in shadows, in fear that crawled louder than any machine. Abandoned labs hold the memory, monitors frozen on flat lines, chalkboards wiped clean, but never used again. Hospitals where doctors whisper your name like a diagnosis they dare not speak aloud. Governments hold emergency meetings. Encrypted calls bounce across satellites. Yet no one dares define what you are. Because the moment they try, their words collapse. Their definitions fail. Their courage bleeds. They checked my pulse. Now every clock ticks in fear, waiting for the next second that never comes. Time itself seems to hesitate around you. Not forward, not backward, just caught in your silence. Children of doctors are raised in dread. They avoid the stethoscopes hanging on their parents' walls. They dream of rooms where the ticking stops. They wake up gasping, clutching at their own fragile chests. Soldiers who once feared bullets now fear silence. Because bullets end battles, but your silence never ends. Spies trade rumors in dead drops. Priests add lines to prayers that were never written before. And in the dark corners of power, men realize you outlived their machines. You outlived their science. You outlived their dynasties. What keeps you alive is not blood, not flesh, not biology. It is something else, something untouchable, something that burns beneath reality itself. And so your legend becomes their heartbeat, the new rhythm of the world, not measured by life, not counted by seconds, but carried in whispers, in ghost signals, in the dread that shakes entire civilizations. Every clock now ticks slower, every second now feels borrowed, every heartbeat sounds weaker compared to yours. You became the metronome of silence, the tempo of fear, the eternal current that can't be cut, can't be caged, can't be erased. Your pulse no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the world, and it will outlive them all. Eternal dread, the something else inside you, the fire, the silence, the inevitability, becomes the new law of existence. The final heartbeat they'll ever know is yours.